Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, TJ Mabardi. We are coming to you live on a Tuesday afternoon. Today is October 8th and some groundbreaking news was just announced this morning that the New York Jets are firing head coach Robert Saleh. This had been something that had been sort of discussed, his job security for the past couple of seasons. We knew he was on the hot seat this year, but the Jets decide to pull the plug after just 5 weeks into the season. So we're going to be breaking down that decision, whether or not it was the right move, how it impacts the Jets moving forward, and more. So we're going to be talking about that. We will then dive into last night's Monday Night Football game between the Kansas City Chiefs and New Orleans Saints. Talk about some of the key takeaways from there as the Chiefs remain undefeated despite the majority of NFL fans hoping that one of these teams are going to be able to knock them off, but that has just not been the case yet. So we'll dive into that game. We will then be doing our weekly segment, the Panic Meter, talking about some of the biggest losses in the NFL from this past weekend and rating on a scale from 1 to 10 how panicked their fans should be following this loss and the organization as a whole, before finishing off the show with some MLB playoff action, talking about some updates from both the American League games that were played last night and the games as a whole this past weekend. So a whole lot to dive into, but before we get into all of that, just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you may be keeping up with us. To any of our live viewers, be sure to use the comment section to give us your thoughts on the latest happenings in sports as we try and make the show as interactive as possible. Whether you have a quick comment or a thoughtful question, we want to hear what you have to say. And if you would consider becoming a bigger part of the show here, you can use the super chat feature that is available on YouTube by clicking the $sign button that is available in that chat box. Or you can go to the link that is streaming across the bottom ticker, gsmcpodcast.net, in order to leave a comment along with a tip or donation, which will get your comment to pop up on screen for everyone to see. Anything would be very greatly appreciated there. We're starting off with the news that the New York Jets have fired Robert Saleh, a decision that shocked many. Now, I don't think that, again, it's all that much of a surprise that Saleh's job was, on the hot seat and that he was feeling the pressure. The timing of this decision is really what's the most surprising part of it, at least to me, considering the fact that, yes, the Jets are coming off of 2 consecutive really bad losses. In each of those games, though, it was really more so on the offense still struggling to find their own. And while Robert Saleh's background is defense, that's more so what his specialty is. And that is important to note. I do feel like there's also the fact of the matter that as a head coach, you sort of surpass just having one sort of backbone of you're only responsible for the defense. He, along the way, had very bad quarterback play. So you can absolutely make the argument that he was sort of set up to fail from the first place, and I wouldn't argue all that much there. But the other part of this is the fact that Saleh hasn't really proven that he is a good head coach yet. There was obviously the piece that came out last year, I think it was from The Athletic, that talked about all of the dysfunction going on behind the scenes with the Jets, Saleh not really having good control over the locker room and specifically the mishandling of that quarterback position once Aaron Rodgers went down. Again, not saying that that's his fault. That is an unfortunate event that Saleh sort of had to try and overcome, and he did a fine job doing so. The fact that the Jets were at least still competitive in 2023. But all that being said, there were points along the way where Saleh could have established himself as a really good head coach. I just don't think he ever lived up to that. Again, you can make the argument that there was a lot that went against him throughout his tenure, and I would 100% agree with you. And the biggest thing that went against him, frankly, is the fact that the team invested so heavily into Aaron Rodgers. And while it is definitely an upgrade at the quarterback position versus what they used to have, there is a certain risk reward with bringing in Rodgers at that point in his career where he was entering his age 40 season, was coming off of a pretty disappointing campaign in 2022 where the Packers missed the playoffs. And I do think that there, again, a little bit of a risk reward situation where Rodgers does provide so much leadership, I guess, in his own sense. He's not what I would define as a prototypical leader on the football field, but a lead by example guy for sure, and somebody who knows how to win definitively, and because of that, the locker room trusts him. But that being said, he hasn't really lived up to the bill that the Jets paid up to this point. And when I say that getting Rodgers was so detrimental to Saleh, it was because of the fact that it was really no longer Robert Saleh's locker room. And he didn't help himself along the way. I do think it was definitely a misstep from Saleh to talk about the cadence thing that occurred a couple weeks ago, where he kind of pinned some of the blame on Aaron Rodgers for his cadence, that it was leading to extra false start penalties. That's a situation where I feel like a little bit more it's Saleh, stay in your lane. Because, again, Rodgers does have the ultimate respect because he is certainly going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer when it's all said and done. That being said, though, it is a little bit of a blind leadership to Rodgers, and that stemmed from the top of the organization, where they go in and they hire Nathaniel Hackett, Rodgers' former quarterbacks coach, as his offensive coordinator. Hackett coming off of what was an embarrassing, frankly, head coaching stint with the Broncos, and at this point now, I think it was 2022. And you bring in Allen Lazard and Randall Cobb and some familiar faces for Rodgers, that you're just kind of setting the tone from the front office down, that this is an Aaron Rodgers-led team through and through. And that's not a bad thing necessarily, because, again, the process of winning, Rodgers is familiar with it. And that's where I think Saleh at times maybe... It's, again, very tough position for him to be in, to try and maneuver, still being the head coach of that locker room while also not undermining Aaron Rodgers or sort of stepping on his toes by any means. So, again, very difficult across the board for Saleh. I do feel like we knew that there was a very real possibility that he was eventually going to be fired. I feel like if the leash was going to be this short, just part ways with him in the offseason. I'm not really sure what they waited around for, and truthfully, I don't really know how beneficial this move is for the Jets moving forward, where if Saleh was so bad behind the scenes and the locker room just wasn't bought into the vision whatsoever, I guess you do sort of have to cut ties there, because if you're going to get an unmotivated football team stepping on the field for you on a weekly basis, you are not going to win games that way. But like I mentioned, while Saleh, I do think, has some responsibility over the offense, that's not his deal, is being the offensive coordinator or structuring the offense. Sure, he has input, I'm sure, in a lot of these instances. But at the same time, that's kind of, the offense is a little bit its own entity. And that's on Aaron Rodgers, that's on Nathaniel Hackett. And the defense, which Saleh does have more of a hand in, has been very effective for the past couple seasons. The only reason the Jets were able to win 7 games last year was because the defense was punching above their weight class so much. And it's a talented, side of the roster there, so I don't know if that's the right phrasing. But the point being that the Jets defense was single-handedly keeping them in games these past couple years. That is at least, a good amount attributed to Robert Saleh and the job that he has done in New York, that now, if Aaron Rodgers plays better these past couple weeks, if the Jets hit the field goal at the end of that Broncos game, if they score any touchdowns in that game, if Aaron Rodgers doesn't throw 3 interceptions, including a pick 6 in this London game, Saleh probably has his job back. The Jets are about to play on Monday Night Football this upcoming week against the Bills with a chance to take the number 1 spot in the AFC East. So this was a couple different ways. Like, I understand things have been really bad. You're playing 2 good defenses the past couple weeks in the Vikings and the Broncos that I give a little bit of a pass to Aaron Rodgers to some degree. I don't really know how that sort of correlates to Saleh has to go now. Again, at least saying this based off of public information where it doesn't seem like he was incredibly well liked in the locker room. So again, from a morale standpoint, they probably have, some more information as to some of that dysfunction in the Jets organization. But that's where I really do think it just comes back to the Jets from the top down. I mean, Joe Douglas, he is probably just as much on a hot seat. There's really zero benefit to firing your general manager mid-season. So that's not the case, but I feel like he's sort of counting his days in this position. And I mean, moving forward, I think that the Jets have, it'll be nice for them, I suppose, to have a clean slate, to reset the expectations. And this season isn't over, by the way. So I'm going to stop myself right there because of the fact that they are still very much in play. Like I mentioned, they do have a chance to come out, number 1 spot in the AFC East after this upcoming week 6 if they are able to pull off this game against a Bills team that is currently reeling. But I do think that it goes beyond, just Robert Saleh or just Joe Douglas. This is a franchise that has been in turmoil for a lot of the past decade or so. And, again, they're focused on this season right now. It's basically championship or bust for them. I have to imagine that this is going to be Aaron Rodgers' last season. We'll see about that. But either way, I don't really know what the future holds. The Jets understand the stakes are very high for them this upcoming season, which is why I think at this point, there's kind of a no-brainer move staring at you on the table, and that is trading for Davante Adams. I don't think that there's really all that much of an excuse. Like I mentioned, this could be Rodgers' last season. They don't have a backup plan at quarterback right now. They don't really have a plan for coach moving forward. It is Ulrich, the defensive coordinator for them, that's going to be taking over. Jeff Ulrich, somebody who the Jets have mentioned at least as somebody they could see as being a future head coach candidate in the future. Whether, I think at the time when they made these remarks, it was, about the Jets position possibly or across the league. So we'll get to see a little bit more of what's on his plate here. Going to be difficult. I would imagine he's going to continue to hold the play calling responsibilities on defense, but we'll see there. But again, to sort of circle back to the point here, the Jets need to be aggressive in this instance because of all of the unknown and uncertainty that follows after this season. They have to take advantage. And, you fire Saleh because you think that there is a higher upside with this current Jets team that Saleh can't bring them to. That's fine. Davante Adams doesn't solve all of their problems. The offensive line has still been shaky. The run game hasn't been there for them yet. I do think that their offense is very one-dimensional in terms of just targeting Garrett Wilson. That's where you add a Davante Adams where he can at least provide a fix there, and maybe they can at least start to find an offensive identity, because I don't know what that is right now. It's basically just Aaron Rodgers. Like, that is the identity, and they just sort of go as he goes. And that's why in the games where he hasn't been great, they have really struggled on that side of the ball. And when he's played, even better, specifically you're looking at, I'd say, week 2 and week 3 against the Titans and Patriots, that's when we've seen the Jets actually sort of, look like a semblance of a team that has real playoff aspirations, albeit though against 2 of the worst teams in the NFL in the Titans and the Patriots. So Jets have a whole lot more to prove. I do think that they definitely have areas they need to go out and invest into, specifically looking at Davante Adams. I mean, I do think there's growth for this offensive line with 3 new starters, and I know it is Morgan Moses that's currently missing time right now, but it would be Olu Fashanu, their first-round rookie, that's currently starting at right tackle for them. So either way, still 3 new starters. They can gel. They can probably step their game up. I don't think that any of their additions in Tyron Smith and Morgan Moses and John Simpson, then you add in Fashanu there, I don't think any of them are bad players. So that offensive line should be playing better than they currently are. But it is with Aaron Rodgers and Nathaniel Hackett, they have to find a way to create an identity offensively. And they can do that in-house. They can also invest into Davante Adams to try and take some steps forward there. But either way, the current brand of football that the Jets are playing is by no means good enough to be a playoff contending team, let alone a Super Bowl contending team. So we're going to dive back into the Jets, circle back there in a little bit as we do this week's version of the Panic Meter, talking about, on a scale from 1 to 10, how worried should the Jets be at this point. But before we do so, do want to dive into last night's Monday Night Football game between the Kansas City Chiefs and the New Orleans Saints, as the Chiefs remained undefeated, even despite some key losses on the offensive side of the ball. We will be discussing where both of these teams stand entering week 6. But before we do so, we do have to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement. The top is so vacant. I don't need shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place. All this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it. The noose if it's some loose shit. A stupid if you choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we're now going to be diving into last night's Monday Night Football game between the Kansas City Chiefs and the New Orleans Saints, which saw the Chiefs, despite the score being 26-13, this felt like a lot more convincing of a win than the final scoreboard actually showed us. And the Chiefs, they've been having their struggles in the red zone this season, so that's really why this was more of a game than it should have been. It was a little bit reminiscent to me of the Saints' loss to the Eagles a handful of weeks ago, where the Eagles were just sort of getting in their own way. Now, that was more mispractice at coaching and, some turnovers there for them. This Chiefs situation felt a little bit different. I thought the Chiefs were more functional, but that being said, 2 of 7 in the red zone. They're now just 7 of 18 scoring touchdowns in the red zone this season. Now, that is good for 39%, which is the 3rd worst mark in the NFL this season. Only the Miami Dolphins and New England Patriots are worse in the red zone through 5 weeks. So that part of it, definitely not ideal by any means for the Chiefs, but they were driving on the Saints the entire night, and that's why it felt so convincing. Even just the fact that they did reach the red zone 7 times is pretty impressive in its own right. They outgained the Saints 460 to 220, and their offense seemed to manage the loss of Rashee Rice pretty well, all things considered, where at my core, it's just a crazy thing to me where at my core, I understand there is coaching and stuff that goes on behind the scenes for the results of these plays to actually play out in real time. But I have such a hard time understanding how open the Chiefs always seem to have guys running over the middle of the field. And I get it. It's with Andy Reid being the play designer that he is. It's with Patrick Mahomes being able to actually deliver the passes on time and get these guys open. But it's still just crazy to me how even in a diminished Chiefs offense right now where they are shorthanded two of their biggest offensive weapons in Isaiah Pacheco and Rashee Rice, and they still have the likes of Juju Smith-Schuster running free, or a Noah Gray, or Watson is the other tight end, not in this game, but they just always seem to have somebody open for them, and it's a crazy concept to me. And then when it's not having guys running wide open, it's Patrick Mahomes scrambling, running around guys and picking up big gains there. So just kind of crazy how the Chiefs offense, it just seems like they are able to surpass just about anything. Not to, give them overpraise, but I really don't even think that's what this is. It's crazy how much more nuanced they are than the rest of the NFL for the most part. But it feels like Travis Kelce might be back in terms of some more actual analysis. 9 receptions for 90 yards, I believe it was, in this game. 70 yards, excuse me. And, my theory early on in the season and entering the year is that Travis Kelce was going to coast a little bit more throughout the regular season. I thought that's what we saw a little bit down the second half of last year. Now, yeah, there are moments where he looks older, absolutely. But I also think that he just sort of understands the moments and he arrives for those moments. And Rashee Rice was just developing into a legitimate go-to wide receiver on just about an every down basis. And now that he's out, somebody needs to step up, and Kelce was able to do so. You get a good, big game as well from Juju Smith-Schuster, 7 receptions for 130 yards. Those 130 yards might be more than he had playing for the Patriots basically his entire time there in New England. He had one tough moment, I suppose, on that red zone interception where he had the ball sort of jarred loose from him, popped up, fell into the hands of that defensive lineman that the Saints have, excuse me for not being, super familiar with him all, headed into this game. But Kalen Saunders, I believe, Kalen? I think Kalen Saunders, with the interception that he had there, was absolutely, electric. The run back that he had, actually, usually I hate almost any time a player returns an interception out of the end zone. He got himself positive yardage as well, 30, 35 yards downfield, holding the ball high and tight. Was very fun to see there. But, all things considered, it was a very good game from the Chiefs offense. And then you also saw Kareem Hunt, who was able to really assert himself as the running back one. It seemed like things were turning that way after the steal fumble last week against the Chargers. In this game, Hunt, 27 carries, 102 yards, and a touchdown. I mean, he just seems to be their go-to guy now. And their run game really hasn't taken all that much of a decline since Pacheco left with injury a few weeks ago at the end of that Bengals game. But it does make sense with, a lot of people, there were at least some people on ESPN earlier criticizing the offensive line play for the Chiefs, which I can understand to some degree. I mean, you saw them switching around a little bit. I think it was because of an injury to left tackle Wanya Morris that, Kingsley Suamataia stepped in for a brief bit there. But haven't had a ton of stability at the tackle positions on either side these past couple years, so I do understand the concerns there. But if you're looking at the run game here and being able to have something to lean on, I mean, the big three in the middle of that offensive line, they can move players, and it kind of makes it easy for whoever is going to line up in the backfield, where you saw what Pacheco does best in the NFL is just downhill running, sort of fast-paced strength up the middle. And that kind of plays perfectly into what the Chiefs try and do. That's all they're asking of Steele and Hunt, to be able to just step into that role, and I think they're fulfilling it very well for the most part. Now, that's the Chiefs here. They're 5-0. We understand what this is for them. They're just going to keep, winning games, pulling them out, and they're going to be in the playoffs. So really, not much to be concerned there with the Chiefs. On the Saints side of this, magic clearly seems to have worn off for Derek Carr after what was an incredible 2-week stretch there at the beginning of the year. It just has not looked the same since then, and Carr in this game, it was just such a strange performance from him based off of his approach where, the Chiefs were bringing pressure. The Saints are currently dealing with injuries to two of their, top offensive linemen in McCoy and in Ruiz to, man that center and guard spot. But the Chiefs just sending pressure, and Derek Carr, I understand there were a couple opportunities. There was that one deep shot that he threw to Mason Tipton late in the game that might have been the play that Carr ended up getting hurt on. But in those instances, just letting it fly because you have to, I understand that. But even from the first drive of the game, you see Carr throw that terrible interception, and it's with pressure kind of closing in on him, but really still not even within arm's reach. And he's just sort of fading away off that back foot, just trying to float it into a receiver downfield in Rashid Shaheed. And I understand, we saw Shaheed, be able to get behind the defense for that deep shot touchdown that they did score. But ultimately, I just don't think that that's at all a smart form of playing football. And throughout the night, Carr just kept taking these leaning shots downfield, and I really didn't understand it whatsoever. And again, when I say the magic is worn off, it's, really not all that magical to consider what's actually happening with the Saints right now. And that is partially in the fact that they're without two of their top offensive linemen. The run game hasn't been quite as effective. It hasn't been bad. Kamara's still been great up to this point in the season, but I'm not holding it against him that he was ineffective last night, but just saying the run game hasn't been quite as dominant as it was in the first couple weeks of the season against the Panthers and the Cowboys, two teams that I do very much think that you can run against. And then it's more on Derek Carr, and that's where you sort of get those weird, erratic Derek Carr moments that just don't look great on film, all things considered. And part of it as well is the fact that I don't think the Saints are extremely talented in terms of pass catchers. Chris Olave is a beast, of course, but, in this game, Trent McDuffie on the other side, who I want to give some flowers to because he was incredible in this game. This is somebody who was all-pro at the nickelback position last year and has sort of moved back to the outside, has taken on number one wide receivers up to this point in the season, and has done a very good job for himself. So McDuffie, one of the young rising stars out of secondary players across the NFL. So he's able to neutralize Olave for the most part, who has 10 catches for just 10 yards. And then really outside of that, what else do the Saints really have from a receiving standpoint? Now, like I mentioned, Rashid Shaheed, you're talking about 3 touchdowns this year of at least 40 yards. He is somebody who can be extremely dangerous if he gets behind opposing defenses, and he's had some pretty good games. He, I think, had 8 catches for 80 yards, something along those lines in the game against the Falcons just last week. It was 8 catches, 83 yards in that Falcons game. So it's not like he's ineffective by any means, but he's, I would say, largely right now dependent on that big play potential. Still a lot of room to grow in terms of being a little bit more of an intermediate guy, which is totally fine. This is somebody who came into the league as a punt returner, wasn't really seen to have a huge upside from a wide receiver standpoint. And I think that, him being such a focal point of the offense isn't a bad thing by any means, but I don't think that he's a legitimate number 2 wide receiver. And then you have Kamara, who is, a good receiving back and can do damage for you. He ended up being the second leading receiver for the Saints last night, but it's also not like they're, super heavily leaning into the idea of splitting him out and having him do damage there, where I think that he is a lot more so just sort of a running back who can make plays for you coming out of the backfield, which is, he got some check down opportunities late in the game when Haener came in, so those sort of inflated his stats a little bit. And again, Kamara, he's a great player, but he's not a receiver. He's a running back. And the Saints are pretty clearly in need of having another reliable pass catcher, because when you are looking to Mason Tipton for the biggest moments of the game, no disrespect to him by any means, but probably not a great sign. Would have been an unbelievable catch the way that he had to track that and sort of fade off to the left there, but a play that you would prefer to have going to, frankly, a more established wide receiver in the league. But let me know what your thoughts are on the comment section in this one. Again, I think pretty convincing for the Saints, all things considered. For the Chiefs, that is pretty convincing. For the Saints, they play in the NFC South, which at this point, I don't know if any one of those teams are good. But I want to sort of further expand on that concept as we're going to be looking across the NFL and talking about some of the biggest losses from Week 5. And on a scale from 1 to 10, rank how panicked these teams should be following these losses. And we are going to be breaking out the panic meter scale, something that we do on a weekly basis here at the GSMC Sports Podcast. But before we do so, we do have to take a quick break. So do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube. Absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we now are going to dive into this week's edition of the NFL Panic Meter. For those of you who are new here, we go from a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being not concerned at all, to 10 hitting the full panic button on where these NFL teams should be at following their losses this past weekend. And there was, of course, a very notable panic decision from one of these NFL teams this morning as the Jets fired their head coach, Robert Saleh. And yet, I still don't think that they should be at a full-blown panic just yet. I have them at an 8. Now, firing Saleh was definitely a panic move, and for that reason, I did want to put them here at 10. But the reality of the situation is, I also think that the Jets still have a very salvageable season ahead of them, considering the fact that they are still very much playing in an AFC East division where two of the teams are two of the worst in the NFL as things currently stand in the Dolphins and the Patriots. The Jets still have, I think, 3 games between those two teams combined that they get to play. So, some wins very much on the table for them. And then they are playing the Bills this upcoming week on Monday Night Football with a chance to take the lead for the number 1 spot in their own division. So as much as, yeah, this is definitely a panic move, I had them at a 5 coming off of their loss against the Broncos last week. If they hadn't fired Saleh, I would have bumped them up to a 6 or a 7. I went with the 8 because they clearly seem to be panicking based off of how they're reading the situation internally there. And Woody Johnson says he didn't really consult with anybody. He just decided to make that decision on his own. Let me know in the comment section what your thoughts on that are, because I'm not quite sure if I believe him totally on that. But again, the Jets have moves in front of them where they can pull their season back together in terms of being playoff competitive once again. Where Devontae Adams is obviously the big trade that is on the table for them that can drastically help them moving forward. Definitely doesn't solve all of their issues. And now we still don't even know if they have a legitimate coach for them moving forward. It is Jeff Ulrich, who is their defensive coordinator that's taking over as the interim. So they seem to have faith in him behind the scenes. They've made that, noted at least in the past. So we'll see. But again, Jets definitely a lot more slanted to the panic side than I would have had normally coming out of that loss against the Vikings. But, they seem to think something's off. They are getting towards, going into that full panic mode. So I have them at an 8 this week. Now, last night's game, the New Orleans Saints falling to the Kansas City Chiefs in what was a really bad game for them. I know technically it was a 2-score game, but the Chiefs should have pulled away way earlier in that game if it weren't for red zone issues. Now, maybe you want to credit the Saints defense for being able to step up in those moments. This is coming off of, a week prior where their defense didn't allow a single touchdown against the Atlanta Falcons. Now, they still lost that game, but, overall, it's a fine team. This NFC South, though, I just don't think that any of those teams are legitimately that good. One of them's going to make the playoffs once you're hosting a playoff game like the Buccaneers did last year. If you can get a weaker opponent sort of on the ropes at home, I'm not saying that the NFC South can't win a playoff game. I'm sort of writing them off right now, to be honest, which isn't totally fair. I'm having such a hard time sort of coming to grips with them. That being said, again, all of the opportunities and possibilities are on the table right now. So the Saints looked really bad last night, in my opinion, but I also don't know. I mean, they're competing with the Buccaneers and the Falcons, where those are also two teams that are very much flawed. So the Saints are very much still alive in this season. I don't think that they're particularly good, but can't be too panicked with them. So I have them coming in at a 4 on this list. Now moving into some of the other big AFC losses specifically here. The Buffalo Bills had them at a 3 coming off of that game against the Baltimore Ravens. This one was definitely concerning for them, where they end up losing to the Texans. You get an atrocious Josh Allen performance, and the offense as a whole has just looked a little bit rudderless, even despite having some semblances of a run game. They're without Khalil Shakir in this game, and it was very clear that they are missing the likes of a Stephon Diggs, who they, of course, played in this game, of a Gabe Davis, just different types of playmakers. But I still think that the Bills are pretty comfortably in a good position in terms of playoff positioning. Now, it's still week 6 is the reality of the situation. So I have a hard time saying that a division leader right now should be more panicked than cooling at this point. But we are going to have to see the Bills sort of take their game to another level. Ultimately, I don't know what their expectations quite were this year. The reality is with Josh Allen and, you expect to be a playoff team and a Super Bowl hopeful. That's kind of all I think they are right now. They should make the playoffs. At this point, given how the AFC East is shaken up, it would be very disappointing if the Bills don't make the playoffs, but I think they're in a great position still. And if that's sort of the bar of success for them right now, at least in my eyes, if you feel differently, let us know in the comment section why. But I'm sort of holding them to the standard of just being making the playoffs and sort of figuring things out from there, I think the Bills are still ultimately pretty on track for that, but they should definitely be in the market for trying to acquire a wide receiver out there. Devontae Adams is the big name right now, but we'll see as the season shakes out who could be a little bit more available. Even like, I don't love it, but Deontay Johnson, who is currently on the Panthers, had a couple big weeks in weeks 3 and 4 that maybe he sort of is available for them if the Panthers are trying to sell off a little bit more at the deadline. We'll see, but I have the Bills sitting at a 4 right now. Don't think it should be too much concern, but they also have looked very poor in the past couple weeks. And Sean McDermott, we already talked about it yesterday, play calling at the end of that game, horrendous. But now, Pittsburgh Steelers, as we're going to dive into the AFC North, 3 teams losing this weekend. Steelers, I thought that was very concerning. Honestly, losing that game against a Cowboys team that I thought was really vulnerable with the injuries on both sides of the ball, having it at home. A little bit of poor weather feels like it should benefit the Steelers a little bit more. And instead, you just get a total offensive dud from them. And honestly, they got kind of lucky as well with some of the poor plays and the self-implosion from the Cowboys on the other end of this. But they are also still in first place, I believe, in their division, unless the Ravens might have actually... The Ravens did pass them based off of division record, seeing that they beat the Bengals this past week. So, the Steelers, it's hard to be too up in arms considering the fact that, at this point, the Ravens passed them. That's kind of where we expected things to be at. The Steelers benefited from some poor opponents early on in the season. Ravens kind of got in their own way, but they seem to be rolling right now. The fact that the Browns and the Bengals, both of them, are as poor as they are at 1-4, we're going to be diving into them shortly. They have the upper hand in the postseason right now, and if you look across the board at the wild card competitive teams, I think it's very much lackluster, where from the East, maybe you're talking about the Jets, I guess, unless they somehow, knock the Bills out of first place and it's the Bills that they're competing for, but you have maybe one wild card team from the East. From the South, I don't really see any world. Unless you're a believer in the Colts, which I am not, that's probably a division with just one playoff team. And then the AFC West, take your pick. I suppose the Broncos, who have a great defense, are playing pretty well, all things considered. But, that's kind of if your top competition right now are the Jets and the Broncos, I feel like you're in a pretty decent spot. So, ultimately, I don't know how great the Steelers are. I don't think they should be I don't think they should be panicking right now. I have them at a 4. Speaking of the Cincinnati Bengals, I have them at a 7. Normally it feels like with a 1-4 team, it should be a lot worse than that, especially if you are a team that is anticipating being a playoff contender, and that defense is terrible, which is a massive disappointment in my eyes, at least as somebody who's a fan of Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and that connection, and I feel like they're being wasted a little bit. That being said, everything I just said about the playoff hunt in the AFC for the Steelers applies to this as well. The AFC North, even with the Browns and the Bengals both being at 1-4 right now, I don't think it's inconceivable to say that either one of those teams could still make the playoffs, where I think that, things are definitely getting really bad for them, but this is now sort of the stretch. They get bumped because of this loss to the Ravens, and for good reason, but I didn't really anticipate that this Ravens game was going to be a win for them anyways. And now you look at what they have going forward for them. They're against the Giants, who are a beatable team, the Browns, who are a beatable team in back-to-back weeks. Going to be a huge one there for both of those teams in a divisional matchup. Then you have Eagles, which is, I do think, winnable. That one at home for the Bengals. You have the Raiders. These are where the Bengals really need to start locking in and picking up some of these wins. I don't think that their season is over, is really what I'm getting at. I have them at a 7. could very much get worse. They are one bad loss away from having the season pretty much be over for them. So they're getting there. I don't think they are quite there just yet. I think that the Cleveland Browns right now are a disaster. They are 1-4 just with the Bengals. The difference is they've had really no reassurance that their current infrastructure is enough to build off of. Where, Deshaun Watson obviously been a disaster so far this season. Offensive line is still banged up. Now Kevin Stefanski is under a lot of fire. The Browns are one of the most penalized teams in the NFL this season. Had another 9 in this game against the Commanders, and ultimately you get blown out if you're the Browns here. Getting blown out by a team that is sort of young and up and coming and clearly now good in the Commanders, but still a game where, you're supposed to have a good defense, and it's not even that the defense fully let them down. I think that it was just more so disappointing with the lack of support from that offense, but, they're right on the cusp here of, I think that they have to bench Deshaun Watson and move forward with Jameis Winston. I don't think that you can cut Deshaun Watson because of the financial responsibilities that sort of come after that, and I understand the Broncos just did it with Russell Wilson. Way different story there. Wilson was like $80 million. This would be $172 million for the Browns. So they're backed up in a very difficult corner. I understand a little bit of the sort of reservations there, desperately wanting to make this deal work, but I mean, at this point, it is already a disaster. I think the Browns just need to come to terms with that, and I think that Jameis Winston doesn't provide a ton of upside necessarily, and this is still a flawed team anyways, but, I mean, they need a spark of energy. Jameis, if there's one thing he can do, it's bring that energy. So I think that that's what they need to do there. And then the San Francisco 49ers. Still really, maybe it's to a fault of mine. Maybe I'm just being ignorant and taking the 49ers' past success a little bit too much to heart here. I'm still not all that worried about them after their collapse to the Cardinals. It was very much disappointing. I also think there's a very real case to be made that if they don't lose their kicker mid-game in Jake Moody, that this is a game that they can win. Anytime that happens, I mean, I live bet the Cardinals as soon as Moody went down, because it just seems like it always comes down to those situations where you're talking about a 4th and 20 that the 49ers were facing, and they decided to go for it then. And then at the end of the game as well, I know Purdy throws the interception anyways, but you understand field goal is totally out of play in that situation. So messy there. Injuries have been a part of the 49ers story basically all season long. So some concerns there, I suppose. But also, I don't think that anybody in the NFC West is really all that scary for them. Now, shout out the Cardinals, team that I invested some, rooting stock into coming into the season. So a big win for them. I still do think that the 49ers are better. Seahawks lose to the Giants this past week. That 3-0 fraudulency that we at least talked about on this show is possibly rearing its head a little bit more. 49ers are 2-3. That's certainly not where they wanted to be after 5 games, but I don't think you can panic with them whatsoever. I think there's still a lot of year left, and I do think that ultimately they will be okay. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section on any of these teams or some other teams that you may have a vested interest into. And, let us know your thoughts. We'll gauge whether or not your level of panic is a fair one. But we are going to now be switching gears and diving into the MLB playoffs, which have been going on over the course of the past few days. Started on Saturday, so we have some games to catch you up on that we are going to be diving into, starting with yesterday's American League action. But before we do so, we do have to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we are now going to be diving into some of the latest MLB playoff action. We're going to be starting with yesterday's games in the American League, where we saw now all 4 divisional round series tied up 1-1. So it's been an excellent start up to this point. I believe I saw a stat from ESPN that it's the first time since 1995 that all 4 divisional round series have started 1-1. So we're in the midst of a great playoffs up to this point. And I want to start with last night's game. The Kansas City Royals defeating the Yankees 4-2 to even the series up there. The Royals, who I think are very much so built around their pitching, they were able to kind of escape this one to some degree. Escape maybe feels a little bit dramatic, but they were able to get out of this game with a pretty poor Cole Reagan start, all things considered. In that 4th inning, final line here, 4 innings pitched, 3 hits, 4 walks, and 1 earned run. Had a handful of strikeouts there as well. It was 5, I believe. So Reagan's, it's not like he was terrible in this game, but he was definitely shaky. And in that 4th inning, after seeing 5 straight balls and a walk involved with some wild pitches in there, you saw Salvador Perez sort of jump up, call a mound visit, signal to the dugout to get somebody warmed up, because what he was seeing from Reagan's definitely wasn't right. And Reagan's responded, was able to get a couple flyouts and get out of that inning, without any damage there. And then from there, you got, again, the Kansas City bullpen that has just been such a huge asset for this Royals team. They were able to, pitch the lights out. Other than Urseg allowing a home run for the first time in months, he did so against Jazz Chisholm Jr. At that point, too little, too late. So that one made it 4-2, and the Royals get out of that one pretty cleanly there. Headed back to Kansas City, technically speaking, with a little bit of home field advantage working towards their favor the next 2 games in Kansas City. But we're seeing their offense knew they were going to have to take some steps forward after scoring just 3 runs against the Orioles in that wild card series to advance out of that one. They knew that wasn't going to be as sustainable as it is with the Yankees, and they've taken some steps in the right direction. Last night, it was Michael Garcia who went from hitting in the 9 spot to leading off the game, and he records 4 hits from them. And that's just kind of the Royals' MO, and it's putting the ball in play, where it's not a team that necessarily scares you with a ton of power. You have Salvador Perez, who goes yard early in this game, but generally speaking, they get on base and they can string hits together, and that's where they did the majority of their damage in this Game 2 matchup yesterday, where it was a number of guys. It was Pham and Hampson and Garcia all stringing together these hits in the 4th inning that was able to really put the pressure on the Yankees and jump out to that 4-1 lead. But on the flip side of it, they don't have the power. The Yankees do, and that's an asset for them. They've now hit 3 home runs in these past 2 games, so very respectable numbers from a power perspective. But also, the Yankees aren't necessarily a team that is going to do a ton of damage on the base paths and force fear into this Kansas City bullpen, where they're able to mostly get through these innings largely unscathed. And it's because they have just far more. The base running has been a weakness for the Yankees for a lot of this season. Again, mentioned this the other day, but the Yankees are last in base running from the regular season, according to ESPN statistics there. And we haven't seen very much of Aaron Judge up to this point yet. I know that sometimes Yankees fans can be very defensive of that. I think it's fair to mention, 1 of 7 with 4 strikeouts. Not what the not what the Yankees fans were hoping out of him. And he's not the only superstar that hasn't necessarily paid the bill or lived up to it up to this point in the series. I mean, Bobby Witt yesterday, 0-for-5. But I think part of the difference is there. And listen, we don't need to compare each player one for one, but just to sort of get out of that, as well, to be fair to both sides, because, both of these fan bases definitely defensive of their stars. Fair enough. That being said, though, Bobby Witt, he also did, drive in each of the game-winning runs in the wild card series. He has been excellent defensively for the Royals up to this point in this series as well. So I cut him a little bit more slack, I suppose. Either way, I mean, again, we don't need to compare one to another, but it's just the reality of the situation. Judge has not done enough up to this point. And I don't want to pin it all on him. It is the Yankees offense as a whole. Again, when you talk about this idea of the Royals are able to string hits together, Yankees not so much. You look at the fact for the Yanks right now where they get opportunities in each of these first two games, with Waka only going 4 innings on Saturday. It was just 4 innings from Reagan's last night. And haven't really taken advantage of that yet. Now, they're at least getting to see the bullpen, which is a positive for them, but 11 men left on base in game 1, 2 of 13 with runners in scoring position. Really felt like they just escaped that game. I mean, that was a very winnable one for the Royals. And then this past game, 8 men left on base, 1 of 6 with runners in scoring position. So again, it's the matter of you got to threaten of having runners in scoring position in the first place and, put some pressure on the opposing pitching. And then on top of that as well, you got to convert when you have the opportunities. And the Yankees just haven't necessarily done that up to this point in the series. But now, like I mentioned, going back to Kansas City, this is a very winnable series for either side. The Game 3 matchups, I believe, have been announced. I think it was Seth Lugo. I can double check on who it would. It's Clark Schmidt for the Yankees. So, the Yankees deciding to not go with Heel in this series as a starter. Somebody who I would have to imagine will make an appearance at some point out of the bullpen for them. I sort of understand the reasoning for them to not go with Heel as a starter in this position. You saw him sort of struggle a little bit down the stretch of the season, and he's somebody who I definitely think can live up to certain opportunities, but Clark Schmidt having a pretty good season for them. Need a little bit more experience on the road, having Heel's first start in a very hungry Kansas City crowd. Feel like could be risky. So again, we will get Schmidt versus Lugo in that game. On ESPN Bet right now, does appear to be very close in terms of the Vegas predictions here. So should be a very fun game to watch there. And then on the other side of the bracket in the American League, yesterday we saw the Detroit Tigers pull off yet another win against the under Tarek Skubal, this time against the Guardians. And I cannot really, and everybody's saying this as well, so I don't want to take sole credit for it, but it's just an objective fact that if the Tigers are going to have any chance of doing damage in the postseason, it has to revolve around capitalizing on Tarek Skubal starts, which is what they've done through these first couple games, where Skubal once again was excellent. 7 innings pitched, 3 hits, 0 walks. I believe he was 0 walks last game as well during the wild card series. I want to double check myself here. Did have 1 walk in that game, so, my bad there. But, either way, Skubal has just been incredible. Strikes out 8 in this game, goes 7 innings. Able to hand it off to Will Vest, who continues to shove for the Tigers, pitching some of his best baseball right now. And then, I don't know, maybe you want to call it a bit of an interesting decision that they went back to Brisky. Brisky, not somebody who does typically, close games for the Tigers. Usually it's Foley, but Foley ran into some trouble in that game 1, I believe it was, against the Astros, where he really sort of messed around there, and it was Brisky who had to come in and close the door for them. So, Tigers bullpen able to get the job done as well. And especially in those Skubal starts, like, it's not like you need anything extraordinary from your offense, really. It's a 0-0 game into the ninth inning. Classic, pitchers duel there, where you got Skubal going up against his good friend in Matthew Boyd. Comes down to the final inning, and it was a pinch hit home run, where I think it's at least the second of the postseason that we've seen so far, with Kerry Carpenter coming in the ninth inning, hitting that 3-run home run and being able to sort of ice the game there. So a very intense one, day game, a little bit of playoff baseball energy at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, at least here in Eastern time. So I thought that it was very impressive. I mean, credit the Guardians. That is still a very good team. And I think that ultimately they should feel mostly good moving forward here in the playoffs, where the Tigers, I mean, they are so reliant on Skubal. They did a good job in Game 2 against the Astros, heading in with the bullpen game and being able to, throw a bunch of arms out there and figure things out from there. But, I think it's risky, obviously, of trying to really manufacture good pitching performances by throwing everything that you have in the bullpen out there. So they don't have a listed starter for this upcoming Game 3, very likely going to be another bullpen game. We'll see there. This is where the Guardians sort of have to strike Alex Cobb on the mound for the Guards. So I think they have a very good chance to sort of swing the momentum back in their direction. But if I'm the Guardians, I'm just trying to make sure that I do not see Tarik Skubal pitching again. I think that, we'll see ultimately. I mean, if they pitched yesterday, Game 4 would be on Thursday, it appears. Can't imagine after 90-plus pitches that Skubal is going to be able to pitch that one. But if this gets to Saturday and it gets to a Game 5, the last thing I want to do is face off against the best pitcher in the MLB in a winner-take-all game. So Guardians really need to capitalize on these next couple here. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section. Again, both of these series will remove on Wednesday, October 9th. So tomorrow, as we record this live here. But, again, it should be a fun one. But we're now going to dive into the National League on the other side of this, where, like we mentioned, all even series right now. So a ton of playoff drama, especially so if you want to look at that series between the Padres and Dodgers, where the discontent between these two teams is screaming off of the television screen and screaming in from the Dodger Stadium crowd. So we're going to be diving into that entire mess of a drama, as well as the unbelievable back and forth we're seeing right now between the Mets and the Phillies in the National League. So we're going to dive into both of those. But before we do so, we are going to have to take our final break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back. Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast for our final segment of the day, where we are going to be diving into the matchups in the National League of these MLB playoffs. And, you know, we're coming at this a couple days later. Didn't get the chance to talk baseball on Monday, but quite the action going on Sunday, especially if you want to look at that Padres and Dodgers game, where the Padres win this game 10-2, but, you know, a lot of the storylines here with this series are less so about the baseball itself and some of the antics that are going on sort of within that series as well, where you have Dodger fans throwing trash onto the field at Tatis in right field and Profar in left field. You have this whole controversy now that's going on with Manny Machado throwing a baseball into the Dodgers dugout, which Dave Roberts is up in arms about. So there is some real discontent on both sides of this series. And as long as we mostly keep it clean, I'm all here for it, because you saw early in the game, the seed was planted a little bit when Profar robbed that Mookie Betts what should have been home run in the first inning. Profar and the fans, you know, getting into it a little bit, all seemed to be in good fun. The way that, you know, Profar, he certainly milked it of pretending like, or not, at least not overly displaying that he caught it. So letting Mookie round second base before, you know, having the, forget which crew did it. Might have been the FS1 crew. That it was FS1, and they, you know, had the home run graphic up for Mookie and everything just for that to be a robbed home run. I mean, that's when sort of the energy started here. And sure, getting a little bit messy. I'm not going to, you know, harp on Dodgers fans too much. I mean, the majority of them are probably level-headed, understand they took it to a level too far. I'm also from Boston, so I know plenty of stories about Boston fans taking things too far. So, you know, I wouldn't necessarily be one to talk about, you know, scolding out a fan base. But I do think that, you know, let's just get it back to the baseball, because this is an emotionally charged series, of course, and is a ton of fun. Getting into the baseball itself here, I mean, this is where we talked about with the Padres, the fact that they lose Joe Musgrove in the last series against the when they were facing off against the Braves, where they lose Musgrove early in a start in that one, and they still have three very reliable starters for them, and it's Yu Darvish pitching this game, and he was stellar overall. His final line here, 7 innings pitched, 3 hits. It was, trying to find walks here, 2 walks and 3 strikeouts and just 1 earned run. I mean, it's basically everything you can really ask for, especially knowing the talent that you have on the back end of your bullpen as well, and the bats that you have for you offensively, where the Padres, I mean, they have shown pretty much no struggles for the most part in terms of being able to produce offensively. Yeah, maybe it was a little bit of a slow second half to that first game against the Braves, but you know, outside of that, I mean, they've been taking care of business offensively. It's just a matter of, can their pitching staff sort of hold up with an injury to one of your postseason starters? And it appears that the answer is yes right now, and they're going to be able to roll on to this upcoming matchup as well, with resetting the top of the rotation, Michael King pitching after he was dealing in that game 1 against Atlanta as well. So, you know, Padres feel to be in a very good position up to this point. As for the Dodgers, definitely not out on them by any means, especially, I mean, how can you be after winning game 1? But still really not all that convincing from their top 3 guys. Ohtani, obviously, I mean, why wouldn't he have an unbelievable postseason debut? Couple hits, a home run, 3 RBIs. I mean, that's just sort of business as usual for him. And Freddie Freeman was still, you know, fine up to this point in the series. Had a couple hits in game 1. Trying to double check here and as for game 2, but really when I talk about the struggles of the top three, it was Freeman was over 2 in this game, had to come out. That's right. Of Sunday's game. I believe that he's good to come back, but feel free to fact check me here in the comments section if I'm off base there. I think that he should be back for tonight's game. But Mookie Betts, and I love Mookie, like I mentioned, from Boston, so Mookie was very kind to us here in Red Sox Nation, but man, I mean, what a swing of momentum it was for him to be robbed on that home run on Sunday, because feels like, and ultimately, each at-bat is its own individual thing. If you don't believe in momentum, I'll hear you out on it. But sometimes when it rains, it pours. And for Mookie to at least be able to get out of his own head and this idea of him not producing in each of the past 2 postseasons, where I think it was just 1 hit that he recorded last year as the Dodgers were an early exit when they got swept by the Diamondbacks, that still really struggling to find his own here. And I don't really know what to say. I mean, sure, he's overcome a crucial injury this year, but Mookie, I mean, he's shown that he can do it in the playoffs in the past, and he had that impact in 2020, and for some reason, he's just not able to produce for them. And he's still a net positive player. He's a, Gold Glove caliber, basically, wherever he is on the field, that he can produce for you. But at the same time, I mean, the lack of execution right now has been a little bit detrimental for the Dodgers. And, for a team that is, I mean, they're talented top to bottom, of course, as well. But even with that being said, I mean, this is a situation where the Dodgers have to be able to, their entire identity, really, and I know that, they've invested into the pitching corps to at least some degree, but, the big 3 is sort of where their offense is supposed to revolve around, and right now, Mookie not even getting on base for them, so I think that's pretty concerning there. Their game 3, at 9:08 p.m. Eastern tonight, we have Walker Buehler versus Michael King. Like I mentioned, I think that this is an excellent spot for the Padres in these next couple games to be able to potentially close out the Dodgers, send them packing with all of this extra baggage that's sort of on the table and the bad blood between the Padres and the Dodgers. Kind of feel like it favors the Padres going home here. But, if you're a Dodgers believer, let us know why in the comments section. And there's a number of different talent perspectives to point to. But I do think that this thing is sort of swinging in the direction of the Padres. And then Phillies versus Mets. I mean, the Mets have just continued to produce classic after classic for us here so far in the postseason, where it was, the rally in game 1, definitely a good one in that 8th inning, 9th inning, being able to sort of pour it on the Phillies and make this thing a game out of nowhere, which they just continue to do. If you don't close the door on the Mets, they will find a way to be resilient. Part of why it was so huge, I think, honestly, that home field advantage on Sunday for this game 2 matchup for the Phillies to be able to pitch last and the Phillies to be able to hit last, I should say, and not give that offense a chance to, continue to rally off of the momentum swings, and just they always seem to come through and be resilient in those moments where Phillies got some bats too. They got some guys who have been doing this for a minute. I mean, Bryce Harper and just what he brings, obviously, in his own right, so incredible. Everything that he does, the back-to-back home runs with him and Castellanos earlier in the game, that was during the 6th inning. And then, of course, it was only natural that it came back around to him in the 9th inning. Such a tough position there, I feel like, for this Mets team, where I have a little bit of mixed opinions here on how it goes. On one hand, I understand. You can't pitch to Bryce Harper in that moment in the 9th inning. I also do think it is incredibly tough to put Trey Turner with the speed that he has on second base. A hit to the outfield wins it. I don't love that either necessarily. So ultimately, again, McGill takes probably what is the right route, and that is pitching around Bryce Harper. Ultimately, got him to swing at one for that second strike that I thought was going to be, potentially game shifting. I thought on that, payoff pitch, the first one, that's where you got to attack and just try and, eke one out there. I know it's a scary proposition trying to go up against Harper, but, it might have just been a lose-lose situation as it was. So, again, I don't want to harp on it any further. No pun intended there, talking about Bryce Harper. But that being said, this is going to be a series that provides a ton of energy on both sides of this. And I don't feel great. I mean, obviously, for the Mets, you go back home to your ballpark with home field advantage with a chance to close out the Phillies. I just also, the fact that the Phillies are able to preserve Aaron Nola for this game. Aaron Nola, I think this is, it's hard to say that any of these games right now are must win, considering the fact that there are, nobody's eliminated if they lose in this game. But I think that this is a little bit must win for the Phillies tonight because of the fact that, you are going to get to have Wheeler in Game 4, which is huge for you as well, where you can have two of your aces pitching on the road. I do love that for them, but I don't know. I feel like this is a little bit of the matchup here going up against Manaea, who I do think is hittable. I understand he is one of the better pitchers on that staff, but I think that these games where you have the clear pitching advantage, these are the opportunities that the Phillies really can't squander. And I understand it's on the road. It becomes that much more difficult. But ultimately, your players just got to execute. And I mean, I don't think the Phillies are scared of anybody, and especially not a New York crowd. I think they're going to be energized off of it. So I think the Phillies will be able to close this one out. But again, things get a whole lot dicier if they aren't able to capitalize, right now with the advantage of being able to push an Aaron Nola start from Game 2 to Game 3, knowing that he can pitch on the road for them as well. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section. We will, of course, be getting back to you tomorrow with some breakdowns of tonight's game. Phillies Mets at 5:08 tonight. Dodgers Padres 9:08. These are both, of course, Eastern times, but that is all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for tuning into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. Remember to like, follow, subscribe wherever you may be keeping up with us. And like I mentioned, we will be back tomorrow afternoon, same time as always, at 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern. We will see you then. Take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that